All right, good evening, everybody. We'll be in Revelation chapter 20 in just a few minutes. And, it's nice to be back. My family has been down for a week, so thank you, Stephen, for filling in last week. We were talking about it earlier. I gave him quite the task to cover 5 chapters last week, but he did it, and he did it well, so... Again, thank you for doing that and for making it through the material so I don't have to play catch-up tonight. Like I said, we'll be in chapter 20. We're on lesson 8 tonight. Satan and the Saints is the title of this lesson. I appreciate the prayers and the thoughts from last week as I was sick, and then appreciate continued prayers. McKenna is still at home sick, fighting off multiple issues, so if you'll continue to keep her in your prayers, I'd appreciate that. So lesson 8. So if we think back to where we've been, we're going to back up quite a bit, right? We talked about our allies and our enemies many weeks ago. We had our allies. We had obviously God and the Lamb being Jesus on the side of the saints. And then on the other side, we had our enemies. We had the sea beast, the political power of Rome, the earth beast, those who enforced that political power and authority. The harlot being the immorality of Rome and the culture that the people were living in at the time. And then obviously the dragon, who is Satan. And up to last week's lesson, we had been talking about the impending judgment on the enemies of God's people, right? That Rome would be punished and would be judged for the things that they were doing. And we were building up to that for many weeks. And then last week, Stephen taught, we finally got to that point where the end came about. Remember, trumpet number 7 would bring about the end of the matter, which was the 7 bowls that Stephen talked about. And those bowls were the final judgment on Rome. Not the final judgment at the end of time, obviously, but the judgment on Rome, putting an end to the suffering that the saints had been going through. Right from the beginning, you saw in the bowls that it was very intense from the beginning. It was meant to judge. It was meant to bring about the end, as we had seen. It was no longer a third. It was no longer partial. It was no longer indirectly affecting men, but directly impacting them. And in that lesson, we saw towards the end, at the end of chapter 19 and verse 20, Stephen read this last week. I'm just kind of recapping. But it says, "And the beast was seized, and with him the false prophet, being the earth beast, who performed the signs in his presence by which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast, and those who had worshipped his image. These 2 were thrown alive into the lake of fire, which burns with brimstone, and the rest were killed with the sword." So at the end of chapter 19, we see the sea beast and the earth beast have been dealt with. They have been done away with. And then a few chapters before, in chapter 17, described the harlot. And then in chapter 18, Stephen also covered that last week. The people, the earth dwellers, were mourning the fall of the harlot, the fall of Babylon. So Babylon, the harlot, the immoral culture, has been dealt with at this point as well. So this is really where we stand in our class coming into tonight's lesson. 3 of our 4 enemies have been dealt with. Rome has been eliminated in this matter. Now, I know you probably have the question. We're not going to talk about it in detail tonight, right? What really happened to Rome, right? If Rome was done away with, what did that actually look like in the real world? We're going to cover that in a couple of weeks. I have a lesson where we're going to talk about that in more detail. So the real world application of that we will talk about. But for now, Rome has been dealt with at this point in the story. And we'll talk more about what that is in a couple of weeks. So all that is left really to deal with is this last enemy, the dragon, which we knew to be who? Satan, right? Satan is the last person, the last enemy who needs to be dealt with. And that is going to be the objective and the start of the rest of our conversation as we near the end of the book tonight. Satan is going to be dealt with. We know the fate of the other enemies in this battle. So now the question is, what is Satan's fate in this situation? And again, we're in Revelation chapter 20. We're going to read it in just a minute. There is a lot of confusion around this chapter. This chapter is talked about by a lot of people. There are a lot of things taught from this chapter. So as we read it, you'll probably pick up on a few things that look familiar to you regarding teachings that you hear out in the world from this book and about other places. So let's go ahead and read chapter 20. If you'll start with me in verse 1. It says, "Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding the key of the abyss and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold of the dragon, the serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And he threw him into the abyss and shut it and sealed it over him so that he would not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were completed. After these things, he must be released for a short time. Then I saw thrones, and they sat on them, and judgment was given to them. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony of Jesus and because of the word of God, and those who had not worshipped the beast or his image, and had not received the mark on their forehead and on their hand. And they came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were completed. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is the one who has a part." Sorry, I got to turn the page here. "Blessed is the one who has a part in the first resurrection. Over these the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and will reign with him for 1,000 years." Verse 7, "When the 1,000 years are completed, Satan will be released from his prison, and will come out to deceive the nations which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together for the war. The number of them is like the sand of the seashore. And they came up on the broad plain of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints in the beloved city, and fire came down from heaven and devoured them. And the devil, who deceived them, was thrown into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are also, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. Then I saw a great white throne, and him who sat upon it, from whose presence earth and heaven fled away, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, the great and the small, standing before the throne, and books were open, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged from the things which were written in the books, according to their deeds. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead which were in them, and they were judged, every one of them according to their deeds. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. So as I said, chapter 20, we're really dealing primarily with everyone who's left, right? Rome has been dealt with, and now we're talking about everyone else. Like I said, a lot of confusion around this chapter. Do you see the key point in this chapter that is talked about most frequently by people out in the world? The 1,000 years, right. The 1,000 years is very heavily talked about and very heavily taught from, where it talks in verse 3 and 4 about Satan being thrown into prison for 1,000 years and those who are with Christ reigning with him for 1,000 years, right? That's the focus of this chapter. And what doctrine, does anybody know, is often taught centered around that 1,000 years? Premillennialism, right. It's a doctrine taught primarily about the end of the world, right? And what's going to happen at the end of time. And what that's going to look like in regards to Satan and the saints. Premillennialism, we're going to talk about premillennialism in 2 weeks in our false doctrines class in a lot more detail. So we're not going to really talk about it a lot in detail tonight. We're going to talk about what this chapter is actually teaching. All throughout our class, every single week, we've talked about our keys, right? And we've talked about this idea of context. And we've followed the flow of thought from chapter to chapter. Every week when we start to interpret the current chapter, we've talked about what has led up to it. What has been the discussion? Where are we in the discussion? Because that naturally helps us understand what's being discussed here. And largely, the idea of premillennialism and the 1,000-year reign stems from a failure to recognize the context of this chapter and what's being discussed here. Again, that's why we've emphasized it, because it helps us. So as we talk about what happens in this chapter, first, Satan is defeated in the first 3 verses. We see an angel come down and bind Satan for 1,000 years, throw him into this abyss and seal it up. And so as we talk right here at the beginning, this 1,000 years and what it actually means and what it actually symbolizes, as we have said many weeks, we need to avoid the temptation to be too literal with what this is talking about and this 1,000-year reign and this binding of Satan, right? Satan is a spiritual creature. He's not going to be bound with a physical chain, right? This is figurative language. We've talked about that every week. This is a symbol symbolizing the binding of Satan, right? It is not literal Satan being thrown into prison. So as we try to make sense of what this is talking about and what kind of binding this is and what the reason for it is, again, I just said it, context, right? What have we been talking about, right? What was the whole discussion of last week? Putting an end to what? This whole matter with Rome, right? We have gotten to this point where we have been talking about dealing with Rome, bringing about the end. The whole book has been looking forward to the end of this matter with Rome. Rome has been finished, so what does that mean for Satan is the point that we're talking about, right? So if we keep in mind who has been destroyed, right? The sea beast, the earth beast, the false prophet, or the harlot, Babylon. I gave the illustration a few weeks ago that I used the word henchmen, right? That these were Satan's henchmen. Because we know when we talked about those enemies, that they were working under the authority of Satan, right? They were his henchmen. They were his tools. They were things Satan was using to persecute God's people, to do his will, to do his bidding. Well, the last couple chapters has done away with his henchmen, has done away with all of the tools he was using at this time to do his work. So does that give you a clue as to what sense he is bound in this situation? It should, right? It's like Satan's had his hands tied behind his back. Figuratively, he's bound. He has no tools anymore. He has no henchmen. He has no one to help him do his bidding, right? In that sense, Satan is bound, and that's what's being discussed in these first few verses. In this matter, in this battle that the saints of Asia Minor are fighting, Satan is done. He has been bound. He has had all of his resources taken away. And then in addition to that, right, he's bound for how long? 1,000 years, right? Again, this is not literally 1,000 years. We've seen time periods throughout this book. We've talked about a lot of them. Have any of them been literal? No, right? All of the time periods we've talked about have been numbers that carry meaning. So when we get here, this number is going to be no different. It is not a literal 1,000-year binding of Satan. It's all part of the imagery. So we have to resist the urge to make it literal. We've looked at a number very similar to 1,000 a couple of times, right? When we remember chapter 7, we talked about the 144,000. What was my word, right? That got repeated so many times. Completion, right? With the number 10. 10 times 10 times 10 being 1,000. Completion times completion times completion, right? Apocalyptic literature does this often. It repeats numbers with multiplication to emphasize the point, right? And that's what's happening here. 1,000 years is how long Satan was bound. He was bound completely. In this matter with Rome, his hands were completely tied. All of his resources completely taken away. Right? This is not a situation where Satan has temporarily lost hold of Rome and will reach down and get hold again and keep going. No, he is completely bound. These enemies have been completely taken away from him. He no longer has any authority in this matter. And that's what's being talked about with this 1,000-year reign. That is what's
That's what the point of this 1,000-year reign is. It is figuratively assuring the saints of Asia Minor, Satan is done in this matter. God said the seventh trumpet would bring about the end, and you can be assured that was the end of it. It's over. Satan is done for now, and we'll get to that in a minute. The next couple verses, verse 4 through 6, right? The saints, we see very similarly the same situation, right? John sees the martyrs who died in the conflict with Rome sitting on thrones. They come to life. They reign with Christ for 1,000 years, right? The same time period. This is described as the first resurrection. And then there's a blessing pronounced for those who take part in this, who have part, that they will overcome the second death, right? Again, approaching this and understanding the symbolism here is very similar, right? It is not literal. It is figurative. The saints will reign for 1,000 years. It describes this as them being resurrected into this, right? We've seen resurrection a couple of times, but at least one prominent time in the book a few chapters ago. Does anyone remember where it was? There was one chapter that was really focused on this idea of resurrecting someone. Chapter 11, right? Chapter 11 with the prophets or the witnesses, right? Who were taken out into the city. Their bodies were left out. People were mocking them. Remember, we talked about that being the saints being down, but what? They were down, but not out, right? In chapter 11, God, it talked about him breathing life back in and raising the saints back up, right? Breathing new life back into Christianity. We talked about that. I think when we look here, we're looking at a very similar idea, right, of this resurrection, right? The saints have been down for quite a while now. But now that this whole thing is over, the Christians are getting back up. Christianity is rising back up. Not that it ever left completely. But again, that's the figurative thing that's talking about. For a while it appeared like Rome would stamp out Christianity. Like Rome maybe had done away with Christianity. But that's not true. Satan was completely bound in this situation. All of his tools were taken away. And as a result, the Christians reigned for 1,000 years. They were completely victorious. The 1,000 years is really talking about the same idea of complete, right? But to the effect of which side they were on. Satan completely lost. The saints, the Christians, complete victory in this situation. That's what everybody has been hoping for, this complete victory. And that's what these saints now are going to realize. Because remember, the saints in Asia Minor are reading this before everything has happened. They're reading this as a warning of here's what's coming. And they know they will get through this. The saints in Asia Minor will be victorious completely. And the complete idea of their victory is not conditional on their circumstance. The book has laid that out. Some of you will go through tribulation for 10 days, complete tribulation. Some of you will die. We were told in chapter 2 and 3, some of those saints were. Whether you lived through the entire matter of Rome or you died during it, you are completely victorious in Christ and with God. That's the message of this chapter. Again, at the end of the last chapter, as Stephen mentioned last week, right? You had the earth dwellers mourning and the saints praising God for what had taken place, right? This is again continuing that idea. You've got the winning side and the losing side. One of them completely lost. One of them has completely gained victory. That's what this chapter is looking at. So again, let's notice a couple of things here as well. To dig in a little bit, to avoid making mistakes that others do in this chapter. And first of all, this is not talking about the end of time at this point in the chapter. This is not talking about final judgment at the end of days where we will go to heaven. It is talking about this matter with Rome. We'll get to that other stuff, right? But right now, in this battle, who won? Christians did. The saints can look forward to that they are winning in this battle. It is the focus of what we're talking about, not the end of time. And secondly, something else to note here, at this point in the chapter, this is not talking about, this 1,000-year reign of the saints, is not talking about all Christians. Premillennialism and other people jump into this 1,000-year reign, they start making it about us, right? We talked about that week 1. This book has an audience. This is a message to the saints in Asia Minor and any Christian living at that time that they will have victory over Rome. That is the focus here at the beginning, and that might change slightly in a few minutes, but here, at least at the beginning, we are specifically talking about the matter with Rome and the defeat and the victory that happens there. But as we know, that's not the end of the story. So we keep going on, verse 4 through 10. Even more so, Satan makes a comeback, right? The 1,000 years, right, was a complete loss. But what does it say happened at the end of the 1,000 years? Satan's released, right? He gets to keep going. He keeps going. He's got more to do now. He's going to go continue on waging war and continue waging the same types of battles. And he's going to deceive nations, it says. It talks about Gog and Magog, which we'll get to in a minute, right? But ultimately, what we see in verse 10, as we look forward, the outcome is the same, right? Satan gets out of prison, he keeps going, he keeps fighting, but ultimately what? He loses, right? He's not coming out for another chance to win. He's coming out, but he's going to lose again, right? And here we talk about what this symbolizes. Satan is down, but he's not out. This vision loosely symbolizes his continued struggles against Satan. Because again, that's why I was so trying to focus in those first 2 points, that it was talking about Rome. In the matter with Rome, Satan was completely defeated. 1,000 years, completely defeated. But once that matter was over and we moved past it, Satan's not done. Satan was not destroyed in the first century when this book was written, never to be seen or heard from again. He kept going. That was not the end of Satan. His defeat was total in the matter with Rome. Again, I'm repeating that for emphasis, right? He will move on. He will continue to fight. He will continue to find new henchmen to do his business. Right? We said he had all of his henchmen taken away. Rome was taken away from him. He will move on. He will find more people to do his bidding. And that's what it starts talking about with this idea of Gog and Magog, right? Don't let those distract you. They're not some mystical beings out in the ether somewhere who are going to one day come to earth and do some destruction, right? That is an allusion to the Old Testament, where Gog and Magog are often used simply to illustrate and bring about the idea of enemies of God's people. Satan is going to use Gog and Magog. Satan is going to find new enemies. He's going to find new ways to do evil. Although he can't use Rome to persecute Christians, he'll find another way to come at Christians, right? And we're familiar with that idea because we live it, right? We deal with Satan on a daily basis. We fight Satan. He tries to tempt us and pull us different ways, and he has lots of ways of doing that. In our world, we see atheism, materialism, the media, worldly relationships, lots of things that we talk about here on a weekly basis that can really tempt us to do bad things, can lead us astray, can have very bad influences on us. Those things are Gog and Magog. Satan's continuing battle against Christians. And that's what this chapter is talking about. To the saints in Asia Minor, regarding Rome, Satan's going to lose, but he's going to keep going. So don't let your guard down afterwards, because he's going to keep coming, and he's going to keep fighting. So we're going to move now to the next section, verse 11 through 15, as we get closer to the end of this chapter. But right here, I want to stop for a second, okay? Because we have a very important point to notice right now as far as where we are in the book of Revelation, okay? As I usually start the class with, what are our 4 keys? audience, time frame, style, background, right? Those keys have been crucially important to our understanding of this book. But we're about to do something interesting with our keys in the sense that we're almost going to break them, okay? We're going to almost break our keys and look past our keys, but there's an important reason as to why we can do that here and the next coming chapters, and why that was not allowed previously in the book. Now, this is extremely important because most people out in the world, as they put together their interpretations and teachings from this book, miss this point. Think about where we are in the story. Christians have been fighting an enemy that has been terrible. Satan has been also fighting against them. We've gotten to the point of the story where Rome, the enemy, has been dealt with. Who's left? Satan. Satan has now been dealt with in this matter. But now, kind of begs the question, what comes next? What's the ultimate fate of the saints? What's the ultimate fate of Satan? We haven't talked about that yet, right? We know in this matter is over. This battle with Rome has met its end. We are at the end of it. But now what? What do the saints have to look forward to? What do all the evil people who still live on the earth have to look forward to? What does Satan ultimately have to look forward to? Those are questions that cannot be answered in this time frame, right? Because those things aren't going to happen for a while, right? Satan, as we know, we're in the year 2024. Satan is still fighting against us, right? His end did not come in that time period. The saints in Asia Minor didn't receive their reward yet. We're all still waiting to receive the reward of heaven, to enter heaven. That's going to come at the final judgment, the end of time, right? What everybody wants to talk about when they get to the book of Revelation. We haven't seen those events yet. So for that reason, as this chapter and this book moves forward to discuss those final elements, we will move past our time frame. Right? And I know we've said moving past our time frame is dangerous, but again, understand why here. You cannot have those last conversations without moving past it. Right? And those things are relative to all Christians, right? So now you can't have those conversations without somewhat having a conversation relevant to a larger audience, right? So again, our keys have been very important. Let's not forget our keys. And the conversations we're having still fit in that context, and we'll talk about that. But again, understand, this is the point in the book where now we're going to look past. We're going to jump forward a little bit. Okay? Does that make sense? Hopefully that was clear. In verse 11 through 15, now we start talking about judgment. We see John sees a throne with a frightening presence on it, and the dead are being judged. Yeah, you have a comment? Primarily verse 11. The content of the conversation will shift right here is the point that I'm trying to make. I'm sorry, repeat your question? No, that's a fair point, right? Extremely fair point. So let me back up. The end of Satan, yes, you're correct. I jumped forward a little bit. Verse 9 and 10, right? We've been introduced to Gog and Magog at the same time that they're talked about being destroyed. So Matthew's right. Thank you for pointing that out. In verse 9 and verse 10, we have, we jump forward now till we talk about Satan's going to continue on. He's going to find those new enemies, Gog and Magog, but their ultimate fate, it is verse 9, is destruction, is the loss, is the battle, the end of their battle, right? Any Gog and Magog, any enemy that Satan finds will be destroyed. Satan as well himself in verse 10. It says, "And the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet were, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever." What is that? What is that talking about? Yeah. Hell. We're talking about hell. Satan is thrown into hell. That is a misconception for a lot of people in the world who think if you are evil, you're going to go down to hell and continue doing what you want. Satan's going to be ruling on his throne. It's going to be a great place for bad people to go. That's not true. Hell is a punishment for Satan as well. And here in verse 10, we're told Satan is going to be thrown into hell. That is the ultimate fate he has to look forward to. Stephen.
I think what in verse 7 and the next few verses, it's kind of making that transition. It's past
Yeah.
the events of Rome, but it's not in eternity.
Mhm.
And so it's still happening on the earth, right? Is
Yeah.
that what you're...
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I guess, where I failed to explain it well a minute ago, right? That verse 7 through 10 really is the transition, to Matthew's point, is the transition. 11, we are now starting that conversation for the end, is really what I meant. But both of these men make a good clarification. 7 through 10 is transitioning us to that point, where at the end of 10, Satan is thrown into hell. At the end of time, at the final judgment, at the end of the earth, Satan will take part in hell just like all of those evil people. And that's what we'll talk about here as well. Because that's now what verse 11 through 15 looks at, is now that final judgment, right? At the end of time, we see this illustration of the book of life being opened, and that's what's used to judge these people. All of the people, the earth dwellers who we've seen throughout the book, the saints, everyone is now facing God and receiving final judgment. And here we're clearly told those people whose name is not in this book, they're going to hell. They're going to take part in the same punishment as Satan. Equal punishment for all evil, Satan and sinners alike. Exact same punishment. And that's what this vision is right here, right? This death, we start talking about the second death, right? The first death would be a physical death. Many people are going to experience that. But the second death is going to harm those only whose names are not found in the book of life, right? So now do you see here why we are talking now about final judgment, right? We are now past our time frame, and we have made it to a very different conversation. And so as we end chapter 20, we have dealt with all the enemies of God's people. We've looked forward to final judgment and said that that's now where there will be an end to Satan's evil, to his ability to find new enemies. All people will be judged, and all those evil will take part in a punishment, or in the ultimate punishment that is eternal. And then chapter 21 gives us the flip side, right? Chapter 20 is a pretty nasty chapter. Satan continuing to do a lot of evil, receiving punishment that's very ugly, that goes on for eternity. Many evil people are judged and thrown into this lake of fire and brimstone. It's not pretty, but there's a flip side to it. A much happier conversation, a much more positive conversation, one that now all of the saints in Asia Minor are probably been wondering, what about us? What about Antipas, who died, who was murdered? What's he have to look forward to? All of those saints under the altars, when we talked about the seals, who were crying out to God because they had been killed for the cause of Christ. All of those in the chapter we just read, those who had been beheaded for the testimony of Christ. What do those people have to look forward to? Tomorrow, if I'm actually facing death, like the book has told me multiple times I might, what do I have to look forward to? What's going to motivate me to get me through the coming days of this battle that this book has laid out? This book has told us all of this stuff is coming soon. Get ready. Here's the motivation. For all saints, again, not just the saints of Asia Minor, each one of us here in this room, this is what we have to look forward to as well. So I'm going to read chapter 21 and into chapter 22. I'm going to do the same thing that I did week 1. When I get to the end of it, I want you to give me one word to describe the vision. Right? Now there's a lot of detail here, so one word might be hard, but do your best, okay? but that's the reason I'm doing it. Let's not get hung up on details here, okay? Because I'll tell you up front, this is something very cool. This is something very beautiful. This is something that all of us should want to look forward to. If you'd like, set your Bible to the side, close your eyes, and just listen to me read it. And picture this. Chapter 21. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there is no longer any sea. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is among men, and he will dwell among them, and they shall be his people. And God himself will be among them, and he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will no longer be any death. There will no longer be any mourning or crying or pain. The first things have passed away. And he who sits on the throne said, Behold, I am making all things new. And he said, Write, for these words are faithful and true. Then he said to me, It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give to the one who thirsts from the spring of water of life without cost. He who overcomes will inherit these things, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. But for the cowardly and unbelieving and abominable and murderers and immoral persons and sorcerers and idolaters and liars, their part will be in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, which is that second death. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls full of 7 last plagues came and spoke with me, saying, Come here, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. And he carried me away in spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me the holy city Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. Her brilliance was like a very costly stone, as a stone of crystal clear jasper. It had a great and high wall with 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels, and the names were written on them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the sons of Israel. There were 3 gates on the east, 3 on the north, 3 on the south, and 3 on the west. And the wall of the city had 12 foundation stones, and on them were the 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. The one who spoke with me had a gold measuring rod to measure the city and its gates and its wall. The city is laid out as a square, and its length is as great as its width. And he measured the city with a rod 1,500 miles. Its length and width and height are equal. And he measured its wall 72 yards according to human measurements, which were also angelic measurements. The material of the wall was jasper, and the city was pure gold, like clear glass. The foundation stones of the city wall were adorned with every kind of precious stone. The first foundation stone was jasper, the second sapphire, third chalcedony, the fourth emerald, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth sardius, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the 9th topaz, 10th chrysoprase, 11th jacinth, and 12th amethyst. And the 12 gates were 12 pearls. Each one of the gates was a single pearl, and the street of the city was pure gold, like transparent glass. I saw no temple in it, for the Lord God, the Almighty, and the Lamb are its temple. And the city has no need for the sun or of the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God has illuminated it, and its lamp is the Lamb. The nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. In the daytime, for there will be no night there, its gates will never be closed. And they will bring the glory and the honor of the nations into it, and nothing unclean, and no one who practices abomination and lying shall ever come into it, but only those whose names are written in the book of life. Chapter 22. Then he showed me a river of water of life, clear as crystal, coming from the throne of God and of the Lamb. In the middle of its street, on either side of the river, was the tree of life, bearing 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit every month. And the leaves of the trees were for healing of nations. There will no longer be any curse, and the throne of God and of the Lamb will be in it, and his bondservants will serve him. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads, and there will no longer be any night, and they will not have need of the lamp, the light of a lamp, nor the light of a sun, because the Lord God will illumine them, and they will reign forever and ever. Hopefully you know it. What is that a vision of? Say it louder. Heaven. That is what all of us have to look forward to. Brilliance. Great walls and strong foundations of great size. Nations will see, there will be no night there. They will have light from God. You've got all of these gemstones mentioned, right? We just read it, so I'm not going to go through every single detail of it, right? This is a magnificent image for these people to try to imagine. And I said earlier, there's a lot of details here, right? But what is one word that comes to your mind when you think of this picture? What? Free? It absolutely is free, right? What does the picture look like? Brightness. Awesome. Do you want to go there? What makes you want to go there? Give me some more words. Jesus is there. Presence with God. No pain. No tears. No evil. This is a great place, right? Like I said, there's a lot of details, but what you guys are pointing out is the point. It's described in so much detail just to make the point that this is magnificent, right? I don't think John could have come up with a better way to describe this. Heaven is a fantastic place. And this chapter makes multiple points here that I'll throw out very quickly about just how great heaven is, and think about what this might mean to these people. It is a place of perfect fellowship. For anyone through these times who may have felt alone, felt like no one was on their side, this is a place where you'll all be together with the creator of the universe in perfect fellowship. No sadness, no sorrow. This is a place of perfect happiness. No matter what you went through on earth, you can be assured it's all not going to come with you. All that bad stuff is going to stay behind. Perfect security. You're given this list a couple of times that no abomination, no evil thing, no one is going to be able to get in here except for those who deserve it. The saints will have perfect security. We will have perfect security. We will be touched by nothing evil here. We never have to fear anything again when we're in heaven. Perfect provision. The trees are constantly yielding fruit every month. No one, for any of the Christians who have been going through a situation where you feel like you can't take care of your family, you can't feed yourselves, you can't get the things on earth that you need because life gets hard and the people around you are evil, that doesn't happen here. This is a perfect place, a perfect fellowship, happiness, security, and provision. You will be well taken care of in heaven. That's something worth looking forward to. Do you see how that might help right here at the end of this story for a struggling saint in Asia Minor? All of this bad stuff is about to come very soon, but this will get you through it. You've got something great to look forward to. Hold on to that. That's why this is given right here at the end of the book. Hold on to this hope. Because heaven is the answer to every problem that you're facing, and it will solve all of them for eternity. And that's true for them, and that's true for us as well. This is an awesome picture. and keep it in your minds as you go out as well. There's a little bit left in the book that we're going to cover next week, and we'll move next week into our applications. We are very close. We're almost done, okay? So I'll see everybody next week for lesson 9.